Hey guys, in this video, we're going to learn a little bit about errors. Now, it's very common to come across errors in your program when you're programming. So you shouldn't get worked up. You just need to take a deep breath and then you need to Google the error. And I'm sure you'll be able to tackle it. So there are three main types of errors. There are syntax errors, runtime errors, and logical errors. So syntax errors are kind of like spelling mistakes. The computer doesn't know what you're saying because you might have missed a comma when you're separating items in a list. Or you may have missed the parentheses at the end to close the open parentheses that you started when you may have been using a function. So syntax errors are pretty common and they're nothing to worry about because whenever you come across a syntax error, the program will not execute at all and the computer will actually tell you what syntax error you're doing. So let's switch to my computer screen so I can show you some really common syntax errors.
Okay, so this is a program that I wrote earlier that is just filled with syntax errors. And before I explain each syntax error, I want you to try and spot it on your own. So you can pause the video, look over the different statements I've written, and see if there's anything that you understand that is definitely wrong. So, I hope you've paused the video and you've taken a look, and now you're waiting for my explanation. So, the first example of a basic syntax error is misspelling a key word. The word print is a key word because it's part of the print function. And if you misspell it, well, Python will recognize that. The computer will recognize that actually, and it will tell you that you spelled it wrong. So if we go ahead and fix it, it should actually be just one T, and it should be print hello world. Now the next one is a missing symbol, colon, or comma. So the basic example that I could think of was, well, there's a variable called user and his name is Bob, and the computer wants to print hello username. So now chances are you may sometimes forget to put a comma after the string hello. But you have to remember to do this because user is the variable user. You're not calling on the string user. And anyways, you close this string. So once you close the string hello and you want to print another item, you have to separate it with a comma. And now this will not print a syntax error. Now another type of syntax error is just leaving out a keyword altogether. So in this scenario, we've just written else print false. But what happened to the if part? Without the if part, this code will not run. There will be a syntax error, which is the fact that we don't have an if clause. So if true, print yes. And okay, so this is actually really bad code if you realized yet, because this condition will always print yes. So perhaps we should introduce a variable that says condition, and we can put it as false, let's say, and we can say if condition. Oh, so I should probably print true here because I've printed false here. Now, this is one really important one because sometimes we tend to leave out keywords, or we run a program with a function that doesn't have enough parameters. So right now the print function takes as many parameters as we want. But there are some functions that we've learned of, such as pop or remove or append, that only take one argument or one parameter into the function. So this is really important to remember, that you should never leave out a keyword. Now the next one is an empty block. This is syntactically incorrect. You cannot say if 10 is greater than 5, just blank. You're not even telling the computer to do anything. So this is wrong. Instead, you can write print true. So remember, you can never have an empty block. You always need to provide something for the computer to do. If you're using a conditional statement or you're using loops, you cannot just declare an empty for loop or an empty while loop, because that is syntactically incorrect. Now, the other example is incorrect indentation. Now, this is incorrect because technically this print greater than 10 is not really a part of the conditional structure, which is if. So you always need to indent after a semicolon. And you only need to indent once. You don't need to indent twice, just once. So now if we go ahead and we run this, there shouldn't be any errors. Over here there is one error. Num is not defined. Now this is actually a runtime error. So I'm going to explain what runtime errors are in just a second, but let me go ahead and fix this and run this program again. And there you go. Everything prints as it should.
Now, runtime errors are those errors that have not necessarily been spelt wrong, but what happens is when the computer is executing the program, if you say 100 divided by 0, the computer will not be able to run that. That is a runtime error, because it's literally not possible for the computer to divide an integer by the number 0. So although your code will be compiled, it will not be executed because it's a big error there. So you will get to know on the computer screen that you've made a runtime error, but so you will be able to fix it. So again, runtime errors are not something to worry about too much. So now if we switch to my computer screen, I'm going to explain some very basic runtime errors that people may encounter.
So again, this is a program that I wrote earlier, and it's filled with runtime errors. So the first runtime error is incorrect indexing. Now, arrays are of a fixed length, right? When you're printing or indexing that or indicing from them or calling elements from them, they're of a fixed length. So 42 has index 0, 24 has index 1, 98 has index 2, and 75 has index 3. So when I say print r of index 4, there is no index 4. So although this is not spelled in any way incorrectly, I've put no space after the print and the parentheses. So I didn't put a space. I didn't put a space here, and it's square brackets, not round brackets. So it's all spelled correctly. So the computer will think that it's correct, but when it tries to run it, this will actually say list index out of range. So let's go ahead and run it. And there you go. Index error, list index out of range. And it tells you which line you got stuck at. So whenever you're trying to debug your program and see why you're getting errors in it, a really useful tip is to see what the terminal is spitting out after trying to run the program. So over here, it will always tell you the path of the file that it's running, the line number at which it got stuck, and then it will print that line at which it got stuck, and it'll tell you its error. So right now it says list index out of range. So we know that the only list that we've called in this line is R. Now arrays are also sometimes referred to as lists, so that's an important thing to know. So that means that the index we provided for R is out of range. So that clearly means there are not 5 elements in the array, because if there were, then index 4 would exist. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change this to 3. Now if I go ahead and run it, it should work. But before I run it, I'm going to move on to the next error. Now, using an array variable identifier that has not been identified yet is another example of a runtime error. So right now, array has not been declared anywhere. I just made up the name and I'm saying .append error that it prints. So I'm going to go ahead and run it. And it says name error. Name array is not defined. So whenever you see this kind of an error in terminal, it means that you've forgotten to initialize a variable. So if I go ahead and I write array equals empty, it's an empty array basically. Now if I go ahead and run it, it will work. Now another thing I just want to bring to your attention is that these are all runtime errors, and you know because the first part of the code, which was these 2 lines, was run, because I said to print the element at index 3, which is 75, and 75 was printed in the terminal before the computer reached this line, and it terminated the program because, it couldn't continue. So that's how you know that you're encountering a runtime error. Sometimes the earlier part of your program will run, but then once it reaches a part that it can't execute, it'll terminate on its own. So now if I move on to the next one, which I already touched upon just a few seconds ago, which is division by 0. Now division by 0 returns infinity. So it's actually incorrect, or it's impossible for the computer to divide any number by 0. So this again will give a runtime error. And it says 0 division error, division by 0. So this is one of the most basic type of runtime errors that you can encounter. So you don't want to do this. Maybe you want to make this 10. And now if you go ahead and run it, it should print 10. There you go. So now moving on to the next error, which is performing operations on incompatible data types. Well, you can't really divide an integer by a string because they're different data types. You cannot do that. It's kind of like trying to buy something in US with Indian rupees. That's not possible. You need to pay in dollars. So they need to be of the same data type to be able to be divided. So this is incorrect. However, if I did 3 times 3, this is possible because all I'm doing is I'm telling the computer to print the string 3 times. Now, again, this is just another example of incompatible data types. So you can't add an integer and a string. You can multiply it, however. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this line. So now this should run. And there you go, 75, 10, 3, 3, 3. They're printed 3 times. Now this error that we're encountering, I'm going to explain in detail. So I have the array R. I just redefined it just for look-sees purposes. You don't really need to. But it's the same array that is up there. It's just down here now, so you can see it easier. And what I've done is I've said for I in range length of array. So for I in range 4. So this is how I'm going to iterate over every element in the array. Do array.pop at whatever index you're at. So what will happen is, in this loop, is I will first be 0. And array.pop, whatever is at place 0. So 42 will be removed after the first iteration. Now, this is a really big problem because it goes back to 1. I should become 1, but the length of the array has changed. The length of the array is now 3. So the really the really bad thing about this code over here is that the range I've specified is changing. So always remember, when you're using for loops, you always need to provide a range that is not changing. Now, if you're not using range, and I say for item in r dot remove item, this is equally hazardous as this. Now, the reason being that array itself, R, it's changing after every iteration, right? Even though only one element of it is changing, its length is changing, the indexes of the different elements are changing, so it's technically changing after every iteration. And it's bad to provide anything that changes in the for loop header.
Now, logical errors are those errors that the computer knows what you're saying. The computer will execute it perfectly fine, but the output will be not what you're expecting because there's a logical or a semantic error in the program. So these errors are really difficult to sometimes grasp because you yourself will have to find out where the logical error is. The computer cannot do it for you. The computer will run the code perfectly fine, but the output that you were expecting will not be there. There'll be some incorrect data that's outputted, or it even might be erroneous. So let's switch to my computer screen and I will explain some basic logical errors that you may encounter.
So the first logic error that many people often do accidentally is misspelling a variable or calling the wrong variable altogether. So over here I have var1, which is hello, and var2, which is world. And I want to join these two strings and print the result. So I should have said var1 plus var2, but I accidentally called var1 again. So this, although it will work perfectly fine, will not print what I wanted. It will not print hello world, rather it will just print hello hello. So I'm going to go ahead and run this and show you. So see, the program worked perfectly fine. So I have 3 logical errors here. There were no runtime errors or syntax errors in them, but they're not what I wanted. So to change this, I just need to change the variable name. And now if I print it, at least the first output is what I wanted. Now another possible logical error is using the incorrect operator. So let's say I have the number 4. And I want to cube it and print the output. Well, all I've done is I've formatted the string to say whatever num1 is, put it in the string here, print cubed is, so num1 cubed is, and then comma, I'm cubing the number. However, this operator is not the exponentiation operator, it's the multiplication operator. So instead, I have to actually put another asterisk. And now I will get the correct output. And there you go, 4 cubed is 64. So now I have 2 correct outputs. And now let's move on to the third logical error. So let's say some students' marks are 89. Now you want to print an A if the marks are greater than equal to 90, a B if the marks are greater than equal to 75, and a C if the marks are greater than equal to 50. And of course, a fail if they're below 50. So one really important thing to remember is you cannot start from the lowest number. Because if you say if marks are greater than equal to 50, print C, well, when marks are 89, they are greater than 50. So this condition will become true and C will be printed, when in reality, this student actually got a B. So how do you fix this? Well, either you can specify the ranges you can say marks are greater than equal to 50 and marks are less than 75. This is one way of going about it. Or the other thing that you can do is you can start with the highest number, the highest bracket. So let's say 90 is the highest bracket, and you want to print an A. Now, if marks are greater than 75, you want to print a B. And if marks are greater than, over here it's supposed to be 50, I want to print a C, and otherwise I want to print a fail. Now, the reason that this works is because the first condition checks if it's greater than 90. Now, 89 is not greater than 90. So, we move on to the next condition, which is if it's greater than equal to 75. Now, if suppose the marks were 94 and I were to run this program, marks would be first checked against 90, and since they are greater than 90, this would be printed and the remaining conditions would not even be checked to be true because the first condition is true. So it's really important to understand that the top condition is given precedence over the others. So if that is true, the others are technically false. So what I mean by that is, even though this condition is also true for marks 94, this condition was true first. Therefore, it is given priority, and whatever its process is below it is the one that is executed. Now if I go ahead and I run this, there you go. It prints an A as it should.